Historical mysteries and conspiracies. People love a good mystery. We wonder who Jack the Ripper really was, or what happened on Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, or what is the secret of the Bermuda Triangle. Certain mysteries are mysteries no more. Thanks to scientific tools that perhaps didn't exist at the time of the occurrences, investigators have been able to figure out the solutions to many earlier puzzles. Sometimes, the researchers simply get lucky. Here are 10 former unsolved mysteries. Number 10. Sherry Rasmussen's passing away as expected. In 1986, Sherry Rasmussen was having a wonderful time with her new husband, John Rutten, whom she had been married to for 3 months. According to CBS News, their condominium was broken into, and Rasmussen, who was 29 years old, was found dead at the scene after being battered and shot. It was suspected that a pair of thieves who had attacked another woman in the vicinity were responsible for the crime. However, the investigation remained unsolved until May 2009, when former LAPD investigator Stephanie Lazarus was linked to the incident for the first time thanks to DNA evidence. She was finally arrested and convicted of the crime. The sentence that Lazarus received ranged from 27 years to life in prison. Number 9. In 1990, a killer clown was responsible for the murder of a South Florida resident. In the year 1990, Marlene Warren answered her front door to be greeted by a clown who presented her with flowers and balloons before shooting her in front of her son, who was 21 years old at the time, as reported by AP News. Sheila Keene Warren, Warren's husband's second wife, pled guilty to second-degree murder in early 2023. The case remained unresolved until 2017, when an advancement in DNA technology and evidence from the crime scene pointed authorities in the direction of Sheila Keene Warren. Number 8. The Golden State Killer was found guilty of his crimes. During the 1970s and 1980s, the East Area rapist, who would later be referred to as the Golden State Killer, terrorized some regions of the state. However, he eventually went into hiding, leaving victims without access to justice. Before the publication of I'll Be Gone in the Dark, which was Michelle McNamara's web-sleuthing turned true crime magnum opus, this was the circumstances. Forensic genealogy helped link Joseph James DeAngelo to the crime. According to National Public Radio, NPR, even though it was not formally credited with assisting aid in the capture and conviction of DeAngelo in the year 2020, shortly after the post of his publication of the film. Number 7. The murders of Patricia Kalitzk and Lloyd Dewey Bogle. Two horrifying discoveries were made within 24 hours in a community located in Montana in the year 1956. Young people discovered the body of 18-year-old Lloyd Dewey Bogle, who had been shot in the head and had his hands bound by his belt. Bogle had died from the gunshot wound. A road worker for the county discovered the body of Patricia Kalitzk, who was 16 years old, the following day. The body was located north of the location where Bogle was found, sexually abused, and shot. According to National Public Radio, the two individuals went to the Lover's Lane location together. Nevertheless, it would take the authorities more than 60 years to identify a guy called Kenneth Gould through the use of forensic genealogy. In 2019, 12 years after Gould's passing, the revelation was made, which is certainly unfortunate. Number 6. Etan Patz has vanished without a trace. According to the BBC, Etan Patz, who was 6 years old at the time, vanished while he was going alone for the first time to a school bus stop in New York City in 1979. Patz was one of the first children to be featured on a milk delivery box. The case remained a mystery until 2012 when a man called a hotline and told the police that he felt his brother-in-law, Pedro Hernandez, who was working at a deli at the time and was a teenager during that time, was guilty of the crime. Hernandez admitted to the killing in 2015, stating that he had killed the youngster by strangling him in the basement of the deli after enticing him in with the promise of a Coke. Hernandez was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison when he was in his 50s. The Leon sisters were murdered in the fifth place. According to a report from the Washington Post, Sheila and Kate Leon were 10 and 12 years old, respectively, when they went to a shopping mall in a suburban area of Maryland in March of 1975, and then disappeared. Even though a major search was conducted, there was no progress made on the case. The authorities had no idea that the peculiar solitary they had spoken to in that year, and who they had disregarded as someone who was looking for information in exchange for a reward, was connected with the investigation. Over 33 years later, when investigators followed up in the hopes of finding answers, they discovered that Lloyd Lee Welch, who was 18 years old at the time, was incarcerated for another crime against a child. Number 4. The murder of Nancy Marie Benelak. In 1970, Nancy Marie Benelak was a court reporter in Sacramento, California, and she was 28 years old when she was stabbed to death outside of her apartment. With the assistance of forensic genealogy, it was determined in 2015 that Richard John Davis, a man who lived in her apartment complex, was the one who cruelly murdered her. According to the Sacramento Bee, Davis perished in the year 1997. Number 3. Central Park Jogger Case. In 1989, 5 teenagers of African American and Latino descent were falsely accused of assaulting and raping a lady called Trisha Mealy, who was 28 years old at the time. Mealy was jogging in Central Park in New York City. According to the New York Times, DNA evidence demonstrated in 2002 that the 5 men, Raymond Santana Jr., Kevin Richardson, Antron McCrae, Corey Wise, and Yusuf Salam, were not responsible for the crime. Machias Reyes, who was already doing time in prison for his crimes against other women, eventually met Wise in prison, which resulted in Wise confessing to the crime in the year 2002 during his time there. Because the statute of limitations for the offense had already passed, Reyes was not charged with the offense. Number 2. List family murders. According to the History of the United States, John Emil List, a Sunday school teacher and Boy Scout unit leader in his hometown of New Jersey, was responsible for the murders of his mother Alma, his wife Helen, and their 3 children in 1971. Even though he left his weapon at the scene, List meticulously arranged the circumstances in such a way that it would take several days, if not weeks, to find that the family had been murdered. This gives him a sufficient amount of time to escape. Moving forward in time to 1989, the killings of the List family were highlighted on America's Most Wanted, which led to a tip being phoned in indicating that List had assumed the identity of Robert Clark and begun a new life in the South. Later that year, he was tried for his crimes and ultimately convicted. He passed away alone in jail in 2008, where he was serving 5 consecutive life sentences. It took the authorities some time to locate him, but their efforts were ultimately successful. Number 1. The murder of George and Catherine Peacock. According to CBS News, George Peacock, who was 76 years old, and Catherine Peacock, who was 73 years old, were discovered stabbed to death in their Vermont home in September 1989. There was no evidence of forced entry. Even though their then son-in-law, Michael Anthony Louise, was identified as a suspect 2 years later, there would not be sufficient evidence to link him to the crime until May 2020. In May of that year, forensic testing confirmed a DNA match to George Peacock in a spot of blood that was found inside Louise's car at the time of the murders. So this is the end of our today's video. Do you like it? Kindly give your valuable response in our comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting and informative videos.